Today, I'm taking you on a journey through time and space to explore how Africa's colonial past has shaped its modern nations. Imagine a vast continent, rich in diversity and potential, whose destiny was dramatically altered over a century ago by the arrival of European powers. This critical period, often referred to as the Scramble for Africa, saw nations like Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, and Portugal rush in with ambitions to secure territory, wealth, and influence. As they redrew boundaries and restructured societies, they left behind a legacy that continues to resonate in every corner of Africa today. In my narrative, I weave together historical facts with contemporary observations to reveal the deep connections between past and present. The colonial era set in motion changes that affected political systems, economic models, cultural identities, and social structures within African nations. Even as many of these countries have embraced modernity, the marks left by colonial rule are still visible in their borders, languages, and governance practices. As you listen, picture bustling marketplaces, diverse communities, and landscapes where ancient traditions blend with modern development, all under a shadow cast by a turbulent historical period. I invite you to reflect on a simple question. How have colonial decisions from decades past influenced the everyday lives of people in Africa today? By examining the transformation wrought by history, we gain a clearer understanding not only of political shifts and economic challenges, but also of cultural resilience and innovation. With a relaxed yet precise tone, I'll guide you through key chapters of this transformative journey, from the initial carving up of the continent to the modern challenges and emerging hopes that define African societies. So, join me as we explore the powerful narrative that connects history and modernity, paving the way for a future that builds upon the lessons of the past while looking forward with optimism. I now lead you back into the historical landscape of Africa during the late 1800s and early 1900s. In those days, European powers converged on the continent, eager to lay claim to its abundant resources and strategic trading routes. This rush was marked by events such as the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, where European nations met far from African shores and agreed upon new boundaries without considering the existing social, ethnic, or cultural fabrics of African societies. Imagine maps being redrawn on pieces of paper, with lines that split communities and merged different groups, setting the stage for challenges that continue far beyond the colonial era. As I narrate these events, picture the hustle of powerful navies and armies landing on unfamiliar shores, confident in their destiny, yet unaware of the long-term consequences of their actions. The partition of Africa was less about mutual benefit and more about fulfilling the economic and imperial ambitions of these external powers. African societies were thrust into new political realities that often ignored indigenous systems of governance and long-standing traditions. The impact of these decisions was immediate, creating divisions and tensions that have been passed down through generations. This vivid chapter in history lays the groundwork for understanding the political borders, economic policies, and cultural shifts that would shape modern Africa. With each statistic and fact, I invite you to reflect on the magnitude of these historical changes and their ongoing influence today. Moving forward, I explore how the political landscape of Africa was indelibly marked by colonization. In a narrative of imposed change, European colonizers redrew boundaries without regard for the ethnic and cultural realities on the ground. Picture vast empires emerging from lines on maps, forcing a mosaic of diverse ethnic groups into single political entities. In nations such as Nigeria, with its incredibly varied ethnic tapestry, these borders have contributed to ongoing internal tensions and challenges in governance. I describe how centralized administrative structures were introduced, designed to maintain colonial control over vast territories. These systems, set up not with the needs of local populations in mind, but to streamline control, paved the way for hierarchy and favoritism that persists even today. The newly formed governments often inherited the centralized bureaucracy with little regard for indigenous methods of conflict resolution or cooperative decision-making. As I guide you through these historical scenes, imagine leaders trying to govern territories that were stitched together by foreign ambitions, lands where tribal allegiances and cultural identities had once provided a different rhythm to governance. In this expanded narrative, I emphasize examples from around the continent. In Sudan, the divisions sown by arbitrary borders have led to prolonged conflicts, while in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, ethnic fragments and manipulated allegiances continue to fuel instability. The political impact of colonization was not merely an administrative reshuffle. It was the beginning of a political identity crisis that many African nations are still working to resolve. By understanding these past decisions, we gain insight into the modern challenges of nation building and the ongoing quest for political unity and stability across Africa. Next in our story, I shift focus to the economic transformation unleashed by colonial rule. Under colonial regimes, Africa's rich natural resources were exploited to fuel the industrial ambitions of European nations. Imagine vast mines, dense forests, and sprawling plantations, where the primary objective was the extraction of raw materials, gold, diamonds, oil, and rubber, often at the expense of local prosperity and sustainable development. The economic systems imposed during this era were built around the idea of extractive colonialism. This model was designed not to empower local populations or foster indigenous industries, but to ensure that economic wealth flowed outward to the colonizers. In this narrative, I paint a picture of economic dependency that was crafted with long-lasting consequences. Infrastructure projects like railways and roads, built to move extracted resources quickly to ports, did little to connect local communities or stimulate internal trade. Instead, they served as tools for efficient extraction and exportation. Even after gaining independence, many African nations found themselves trapped in an economic structure that favored raw material exports over diversified economies. This dependency continues to expose these nations to the volatile swings of global commodity markets, leaving them vulnerable and often in cycles of debt. While recounting these facts, I make sure to emphasize the resilience of African economies. Despite the weight of history, nations across the continent are gradually breaking free from these exploitative economic models. There are efforts underway to diversify industries, develop local markets, and harness innovation and technology to build a more self-reliant future. The journey through economic history is a reminder of both the challenges imposed by colonial legacies and the persistent spirit that drives economic transformation across Africa. Now, I invite you to explore the social and cultural dimensions shaped by centuries of colonial rule. When European powers arrived, they introduced not only new political and economic systems, but also new social orders, deeply influencing the fabric of African life. In my narrative, I describe how colonial regimes aggressively imposed European languages, religions, and education systems, often undermining the rich, diverse cultural traditions that had flourished for generations. Imagine indigenous languages sidelined in favor of English, French, or Portuguese, and traditional practices pushed to the margins of public life. This transformation affected everyday interactions and slowly reshaped community identities. Traditional ways of preserving history, passing on knowledge, and celebrating local customs were often replaced by curricula and religious practices that mirrored European standards. I illustrate scenes of children in classrooms echoing foreign tongues instead of the songs and stories of their ancestors. Meanwhile, social hierarchies were redrawn, with colonial powers favoring certain groups, thereby exacerbating existing divisions and sometimes creating new ones. For example, in Rwanda, historical divisions between Hutu and Tutsi were deepened by policies that institutionalized inequality, leaving long-lasting scars on the nation's social fabric. Yet, while these changes brought significant challenges, they also opened pathways for cultural fusion and hybrid identity formation. African communities have shown remarkable resilience by adopting and adapting external influences into vibrant and unique cultural expressions. Music, art, and literature in modern Africa often reflect a rich tapestry where traditional elements coexist with modern ideas, forming a dynamic blend that speaks to both the past and the present. Through this narration, I capture the bittersweet reality. Despite the disruptions caused by colonization, African societies continue to celebrate and reinvent their heritage in creative and inspiring ways. In this extensive segment, I tie together the historical influences and their persistent effects on modern-day African politics and society. Imagine contemporary Africa as a vast canvas where the echoes of the colonial past are painted in every stroke. The political systems in many African nations still carry the imprint of European administrative methods. These systems, characterized by centralized power and bureaucratic structures, reveal a clear lineage to the colonial administrations that were once designed simply to control vast and diverse populations. As you listen, visualize modern government halls and bustling political arenas where debates over governance, representation, and national identity are framed by structures long inherited from a bygone era. Ethnic divisions, too, remain a lingering legacy. I describe how artificial borders force together disparate communities, leading to complex identity questions that still manifest in current political dynamics. In areas like Kenya or Côte d'Ivoire, political alliances often align with ethnic lines, a reminder of decisions made over a century ago. These alliances sometimes fuel rivalry and patronage systems that overshadow objectives of national unity. I paint a picture of leaders navigating these troubled waters, attempting to forge paths toward inclusive governance, even as they grapple with remnants of colonial policies that favored certain groups over others. On the societal front, I explore how the colonial legacy has influenced modern identities and cultural narratives. African societies today are engaged in a vibrant dialogue where historical grievances meet aspirations for progress and self-determination. There is a growing movement toward Pan-Africanism, a unifying ideology that seeks to reclaim the narrative from colonial times and assert Africa's place in the global community. I illustrate scenes of dynamic street art, cultural festivals, and academic discussions that celebrate the diversity of African experience and rewrite the story of the continent with pride and ambition. Furthermore, modern economic and diplomatic relationships are deeply intertwined with this history. Former colonial powers still maintain economic ties through trade agreements, aid, and investment. Even as African nations cultivate new relationships with countries like China and India, relationships sometimes viewed as fresh chapters in the ongoing story of external influence and internal resilience. I describe how African leaders are balancing these international dynamics, using historical insights to negotiate fairer terms and foster self-reliance. The narrative carefully outlines examples of governance reform, technological innovation, and grassroots movements that are gradually transforming the political and economic landscapes. These efforts, I note, are not merely about overcoming past wrongs, but are also about forging a future where African nations set the agenda on their own terms. The road has been long and fraught with challenges, yet the spirit of resilience and the quest for inclusive progress continue to push the boundaries of what can be achieved. This comprehensive look into modern politics and society shows that while the shadows of colonization still fall on many areas, they also serve as a powerful reminder of the transformative potential that emerges when history is acknowledged and used as a guiding force for genuine change. As we reach the end of our narrative, I bring together the threads of Africa's colonial past and its enduring impact on modern nations. Throughout our journey, we have seen how the redrawn borders, imposed political systems, and extractive economic models have left deep marks, influencing not only governance and market structures, but also the very identity of nations and individuals. This exploration reveals a story of both adversity and resilience, where the challenges of history coexist with the vibrant potential for renewal and reinvention. In reflecting on these insights, I stress that understanding the effects of colonization is not merely an academic endeavor. It is crucial for meaningful dialogue about the future. Recognizing the ways in which historical decisions continue to influence modern society encourages us to seek solutions that address long-standing inequalities and foster unity. Each nation's efforts toward reform, whether in the realm of politics, economics, or culture, offer hope and serve as testimonies to a spirit that refuses to be defined solely by a troubled history. My narrative today has offered a panoramic view of the legacies of colonization, highlighting both the burdens inherited and the promise of transformation. As Africa continues to evolve, The legacy of the past informs a future rich with possibilities for economic growth, political stability, and cultural renaissance. By acknowledging these histories and their complexities, we empower ourselves to forge a world that is more just and united. In this reflection, I invite you to envision a future where the lessons of yesterday guide us toward a path of progress, understanding, and shared prosperity. Stepping beyond the historical narrative, I now turn my gaze to the future, a future built on resilience, innovation, and a deep commitment to redefining destiny. In this reflective journey, I illustrate how modern African societies are not only transforming inherited systems, but are also creating entirely new frameworks in education, technology, and governance. Picture vibrant innovation hubs emerging amid familiar urban landscapes, where young minds blend tradition with contemporary ingenuity to craft solutions for local challenges. I describe how communities across Africa are reimagining their identities, drawing strength from both ancestral heritage and the promise of modern progress. Cultural festivals, art exhibits, and community-driven projects are revitalizing a sense of pride and unity, reinforcing the idea that despite a troubled past, the spirit of the continent remains unyielding. In bustling markets and quiet neighborhoods alike, there is a shared drive towards self-determination and empowerment, a collective effort to reclaim history as a foundation for future achievement. Throughout this reflective narrative, I highlight examples of successful reform efforts from different regions, demonstrating that change is both possible and underway. The narrative shows leaders who are listening to the voices of their people, making bold moves to restructure political institutions and stimulate economic diversification. International partnerships are being redefined on more balanced terms, ensuring that Africa's vast potential is recognized and nurtured globally. As I conclude this journey, the overarching message is clear. The road ahead is illuminated by lessons learned from the past, and every challenge encountered becomes an opportunity for transformation. With a forward-looking spirit and respectful acknowledgement of history, the future of Africa is poised to be one of growth, innovation, and inclusive progress for all. Total, 2,550 words.